Okay, so now we look to explore the challenges and the way in which the National Convention will face these challenges and the way in which they will respond. And we are going to examine and look at the role of assassinations during this period of 1793. We're going to look at the beginning of a civil war. That means countrymen fighting countrymen, breaking out across the rural countrysides. And then we're going to finish with the Federalist Revolts, which is a response to the brutality and the shutdown of rural protests. So first and foremost, we begin by looking at the assassinations that will take place across Paris. Most notably, we will look at the assassination of Jean-Paul Marat and how his murder at the hands of a Gironde supporter will increase the panic, will increase the pandemonium that is centralising in the epicenter of terror that is Paris, and how these assassinations will be a stimulus to further terror and will provoke a period in which terror will reign. First and foremost, we need to remind ourselves who exactly was this character of Jean-Paul Marat. We looked at him the other day and we went through what estate where he'd come from, what was unique about him, what was his allure, what was his appeal, what talent, skills did he have that managed to inspire the masses. We looked at what political clubs he was affiliated with, and we looked at what it was how he exactly connected with the people. So to remind yourself, Marat was actually not born in France, he was born in Switzerland, however found himself drawn to coming to France because of all the artistic elements that were going on and the enlightened thinking. It was a hub of intellectualism, so people were drawn to obviously coming to a place that was challenging the old regime and challenging ideas. What was alluring about him, what was charismatic, what was appealing about Jean-Paul Marat was that he was innovative in how he used his language. He was a creative thinker, thus how he obviously created his pamphlets and his newspaper. He had incredible wit and he had political insight in a way that he could express the sufferings and feelings of the people in a way in which they could comprehend, and a language in which they could connect with and understand. His talents and skills, well, you know that notably he was a writer and he formed the revolutionary newspaper L'Arme du Peuple, which in English is the friend of the people. So he would use this newspaper to express his fiery rhetoric, and he would use this newspaper to criticise those elements in society that he deemed as against the revolution. He would use inflammatory language that would really strike at the hearts of people such as the sans-culottes who are looking for that inspirational leader. And effectively his newspaper was a propaganda pamphlet. It was pro-Jacobins and it was pro-revolution and it was pro-violence. So he used his newspaper to put across a particular point of view. When it became to political affiliation, originally he was a member of the Cordelia Club, but eventually the Cordelia Club emerges and intertwines with the Jacobin Club. And once it does, he will find himself being one of those people that puts their hand up to be elected into the assembly, and he will find himself being one of those 144 who sort of break away in the Legislative Assembly to declare themselves as a revolutionary commune. So he will put his love into Paris by, obviously, for those 4 weeks before the National Convention was actually convened, he, alongside Danton, will be somebody who inspires the September massacres in that 4-week gap when we don't have a formalised government and the Revolutionary Commune of Paris is running the show. Lastly, he is obviously good friends with Danton, and he also connects and associates with Desmoulins. And together these men know that they have the ear of the sans-culottes, and they use that ear and that power over the sans-culottes to effectively incite the sans-culottes to insurrect. So they incite them to use their mass in numbers to protest, to put that added pressure on the assembly / becoming the national convention. And lastly, it is his famous words, "Let the blood of traitors flow," that are the key sort of inflammatory sentence to really spark the September massacres, which will become something that the Girondins absolutely despise, but also will become a core disgruntlement of people in the countryside. So Marat is setting himself up for being an enemy of people who think the revolution has gone too far. To them, to the countryside and to Girondins, Marat is a symbol of somebody who is using fiery rhetoric to inspire the mob, so inspire the sans-culottes, to commit murder in the name of saving the revolution. And that is not the way that the majority of France wanted their revolution to go. So remembering that you have this worksheet, and before you start listening to me, you should be pausing right now just to sit down for 2-3 minutes and actually read the information that is on this worksheet, so that when I go through it, it clicks. So I would pause right now and read your worksheet. Welcome back from reading your worksheet. Okay, so what we need to talk about here is quite obviously the assassination. That means the deliberate murder of journalist and provocateur Jean-Paul Marat. Jean-Paul Marat is murdered on the 12th of July 1793, and as you can see in the image to the right of the screen, you can see that there is a female in his, obviously his bathroom. Remembering that Jean-Paul Marat would be in a bathroom because he had contracted a skin disease from the early days of the revolution from living in the sewers, and so he needed to be able to bathe bathe in vinegar-soaked bandages and in the bath. So often people would find him in the bath, and he was obviously notably covered, he wasn't exposed, and sans-culottes and followers of his would be let into this room so they could sit next to him and discuss issues. Charlotte Corday, unbeknownst to the people outside of Jean-Paul Marat's bathroom, she masks herself as someone who wants to talk to Jean-Paul Marat, and she comes across as someone that seems to be very pro-him and pro-Jacobin. However, she has alternative motives. Charlotte Corday is actually a supporter of the Girondin political club. She, like the Girondins, thinks the revolution has gone too far. She feels absolutely disgusted by the mayhem and the massacres that occurred at the September massacres. And she sees Jean-Paul Marat as somebody who is inciting these mass murders being committed by the mob of the sans-culottes. So she takes it upon herself to deliver him a letter which allows her to get into the room. This gains her admittance into the room. Again, you know that he's in the bath because he has a chronic skin condition. He is in the bath because this gives him pain relief from this discomfort. And obviously Charlotte Corday enters the room. She can see that he is armless. He can't defend himself in any manner. He simply is writing. There is no weapons for him to use. And she takes it upon herself that the minute they are comfortably alone, that she stabs him. She cuts one of his main arteries, and Jean-Paul Marat quickly begins to bleed to death. Almost immediately as she leaves the room, people outside can obviously see the blood on her, and probably the last cries of Marat are heard, and she is ultimately arrested at the scene. She's imprisoned as a result of committing this murder of Jean-Paul Marat. She is tried, she is convicted, and 5 days after killing him, on the 17th of July 1793, she is taken to the guillotine. She is made to wear a red dress, and this red dress symbolises patricide, which just simply means killing of one's own father. So the revolutionaries who clearly obviously have a love and admiration for Jean-Paul Marat are trying to highlight that she has killed a father of the revolution. And that's what it said. She had killed the father of the people. During her trial, she explained, "I have killed one man to save 100,000 more." She mistakenly believes that Marat's death would end the violence of the revolution. She obviously couldn't foresee that it would actually incite more. Instead, Corday's action has the absolute opposite effect. Marat now becomes a revolutionary cult hero. He is someone that the sans-culottes now start to see as a martyr. He has died for the revolution. He has died for the people. We must avenge his death. And his murder adds to the already considerable fear of conspiracy and counter-revolution amongst the leaders of the revolution. This fear becomes a major reason why the government will go down the lines of instigating state violence, which will become rapidly known as the Reign of Terror, which we will look at after your sack. As a result of the Girondin supporter Charlotte Corday murdering Jean-Paul, the Jacobins strategically used Marat's murder as a political move to oust the Girondin deputies from the National Convention. If you can remember the makeup of the National Convention, remember it was that arch thing that I sort of showed you? There was 749 deputies in there, you had 200 Jacobins, you had 160 Girondins, and then you had that massive 389 group of undecided independent. While the Jacobins see this as their moment, if we can expel the Girondins from the National Convention, if we can blame this assassination, this murder on them, and we remove them, then clearly a lot of those undecided independent men are going to just formally go over to the Jacobin side, because clearly the Jacobins will be the most dominant political club within the National Convention. As a result of his assassination, the Jacobin members of the National Convention strongly encouraged the sans-culottes to use their right to insurrection, remembering that just means their right to uprise and use their physical presence to put pressure on the government. As a result, absolutely incensed by the murder of their leader, one of their fathers, somebody who inspired them, somebody who took the time to connect with them through his intellect and his words and his newspaper, the sans-culottes do pressure the government. They actually storm the National Convention and they demand that the Girondin deputies be tried now, just like the king, for treason. As a result, the National Convention takes a vote. A large amount of those undecided independent men vote alongside the Jacobins and they formally expel the Girondins from the National Convention. So as of July 1793, we have a major power shift, and that is that the National Convention is now being largely controlled by the Jacobin Club, who has the majority of deputies in there, and remembering that 24 of those people are from that revolutionary commune of Paris, so we know that they're radical, so the government has a real radical element to it. Clearly, the defining moment of Jean-Paul Marat's murder is the political move to get the Girondins out of the convention. So from this point of the revolution, we can see they're all being boarded onto carriages and swiftly taken out. A large majority of them will be placed in prison. Some will obviously face death by guillotine without even a fair and free trial or presumption of innocence. They don't even get to argue the fact that they did not personally motivate Charlotte Corday to murder Jean-Paul Marat. She took it upon herself. She thought that the murder of Marat would ease and calm the revolution, and clearly you can see it's had the opposite effect. But from this point on, clearly the National Convention being largely controlled by the Jacobin Club and those revolutionary members of the Revolutionary Commune of Paris, they're going to work now to push forward in this revolution, eliminating all opposition to their control. So anybody who now opposes the Jacobin Club will find themselves being classed as a counter-revolutionary, and that is someone against the revolution. So the revolution now does not have an opposing voice.
The king's blood is spilt. The revolutionaries victorious. But the enemies of the revolution will soon claim a victory of their own. Their target? The man who is calling for so many heads to roll. Jean-Paul Marat. The execution of Louis XVI marks ultimate victory for the revolutionaries. A pivotal moment when a young nation, the French Republic, is literally born in blood. By the end of 1792, the radical Jacobins, believing the young revolution is in danger of being sabotaged by traitors, are steering the revolution with more and more violent means. But the Girondins, representing the people of the French countryside, want to slow the ascending violence for fear it will lead to civil war. Their most vocal opponent, Jean-Paul Marat, strikes back at the Girondins with furious tirades in his newspaper, naming those he believes are plotting against the revolution. Marat, who once called for the execution of 200, now demands 200,000 heads fall.
When you look at Marat's journalism, it's got one basic principle, which is be more extreme than anybody else and call for people to be killed. If you look at Marat's journalism all the time, he's saying, if only we chopped off a few heads, then things will be all right. And when things aren't all right, if only chop off a few more heads, things will be all right. Suddenly, people in Paris begin to massacre people, and Marat is the first to claim credit for that.
But the radical movement hasn't taken hold everywhere. People outside of Paris are furious at the spiraling brutality of the Jacobins and call for an end to the bloodletting. And the message reaches the lovely Charlotte Corday, an unassuming yet determined young woman from the provinces.
Charlotte Corday is an average person in the city of Caen. She's appalled by the killing that's going on there, and she perhaps rightly considers Marat one of the chief authors of that. He's been instrumental on the radical side of the revolution. His Ami de Peuple is still calling for heads.
July 13th, 1793. Charlotte Corday arrives in Paris. She knows that the friend of the people has an open-door policy at his home, where he can be found at nearly any hour soaking in his medicinal bath. Corday comes on the pretense that she carries a list of traitors, those collaborating with foreign armies to put an end to the revolution. Marat asks for the list, promising Corday that the traitors will be guillotined the next day.
Having given him that, she then produces a poignard, a little stiletto, and stabs him in the chest.
The so-called friend of the people dies instantly. The angry voice of his newspaper silenced.
When the revolution turns bloodthirsty, it's very easy to say it was his fault. And that, of course, is what those who hated him or feared him did say, and that's one of the reasons why Charlotte Corday actually murders him in 1793, because she regards him as responsible for many of the bloody atrocities that have actually occurred.
Corday makes no attempt to escape. At her trial, she is unrepentant.
What did you expect to achieve in assassinating Marat?
Peace. Now that he's dead, peace will return to my country.
Charlotte Corday is swiftly executed, and her dream of peace dies along with her. She has killed Marat the man, but she has created Marat the legend. His death most famously depicted by the revolutionary painter Jacques-Louis David.
He became a martyr. He became a kind of almost religious figure. You had people offering up prayers that went, "Heart of Jesus, Heart of Marat." You had these scenes at his funeral where the bathtub in which he was murdered was sort of put up on the altar, almost as if it was a kind of crucifix.
If you look at David's painting of Marat's death, Marat's body is draped in precisely the same way as the body of Christ is depicted in classic representations of the Pietà, the descent from the cross. So clearly there's an identification of Marat with Christ, with Marat representing the new kind of God of the radical